So the World Cup happened. Out of the 16 qualifying teams at the World Cup this year, I think that we actually have a very interesting bunch. Some teams that have never made it before. Colombia, Brazil, Spain, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, all newcomers to an actual playoffs of the World Cup. And it's on everybody's mind right now which teams are going to come out on top. I think it's a very interesting topic to think about. Who are the best teams coming to the World Cup? Number 16, Mexico. Mexico kind of had a free ride into the World Cup for this year. Guatemala put up zero fight. Costa Rica wasn't very good themselves, and Puerto Rico was like one of the only losing teams in the whole tournament to take a single map, at least in the Americas. I do think there's a chance they can make something work with an experienced coaching staff involving Nomi from former San Francisco Shock. Although the lack of even contenders level experience does put me on edge a little bit for this team, I do think there's a chance they could make it above the next couple of teams with a perfect meta, perfect preparation, and a little bit of luck. Number 15, Brazil. Brazil are made up of kind of the South American super team, which makes it extremely shocking that they managed to lose to Colombia for everybody except for me, who had faith the whole time. And I gotta be honest, I'm not really feeling it. Yes, they are legends of the game for South America, but most of them haven't played the game since 2020 at a competitive level. This is really their first time back at it since then, and a lot of them have even retired after that. It's going to be really tough to see if this team can beat the teams around this bottom three level, who I think could all realistically beat each other given the circumstance. Number 14, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a team that people are placing very low for kind of getting stomped into the dirt by South Korea and Japan, but they do have a lot of merit to their roster. For example, Zhao Lian is an incredible DPS player with a lot of experience in Tier 2, which is more than what could be said for a lot of teams around this level. They were also in quite a difficult group with the teams above them, South Korea being South Korea, and Japan having a core that's been around for what feels like years with Varel, who've been a good Asia Pacific contenders team for a long time. Still, though, I do think that there's a bit of a power spike after this point, but I would love to be proven wrong and see if Hong Kong can really make something work. Number 13, Canada. This is probably the biggest hot take I have. I'm not very impressed by the roster that Canada have put up this year. I'm not super confident in the tank line in particular. False and Astronex do not inspire faith in me, and even though Seeker is fantastic, I don't know if Noxious can keep up, especially given the fact that the next few teams coming up have shown incredible consistency in a lot of different areas, and I don't think they've really been tested. Mexico's a number 16 team for me, who they, did 2-0, but they kind of got obliterated by the United States in a way that I wouldn't really expect from Canada, who in the past has had chances of beating the US. I do think that people should be still rating them highly because they do have a lot of merit. Seeker is incredible on his own, but I don't know if that'll be enough to keep Canada in the race, just like it's not for the Valiant. Number 12, Japan. Japan has had a very good qualifying round. They 2-0'd everybody below them and only lost a game to South Korea, although I do think they're in a bit of a similar camp to Canada. They haven't really been tested by any significantly good teams, with a minor exception of Hong Kong, who have a star DPS, but they have a very good amount of synergy, and if that can carry them, they can absolutely make it farther than 12th, but I'm not super confident in Japan. Number 11, Spain. In theory, I feel like you could absolutely put Spain higher than this, given the fact that they did end up placing higher than France in that group, including a win that they took over them. But I think the miracle run is going to stop any second now. I don't know how much faith I have. A strange loss to Italy does put faith in the dumps slightly, but I'm mostly just concerned by the level of play this team has. Helv is fantastic in Canale. I've had rated very highly for a long time, but with very little knowledge about their coaching staff as well as the rest of their players, as well as having some fairly random, it feels, wins over teams who it doesn't really feel like they deserve it over, I'm not super confident that Spain will exceed the expectations that are currently being placed on them. But hell, couldn't be surprised if they do. Number 10, France. The team who has so many coaches that instead of having a substitute tab on Liquipedia, they have a manager and a coaching tab. France don't have the best support line, and I think that's going to be a major considering factor coming into this tournament. Supports are everything, and with a bad support line, I don't think a team will make it through very far. You need to have superstar level supports, and I think France really lack that. If they had a better flex support to pair with FD God, I would feel a lot more confident. But the lack of players like Hip, even Gray, make this roster overall much less appealing. Still, though, they're in theory better than a lot of these other teams. For example, Ben Best and Poco make a really good tank line, as well as Nico coming back. I wouldn't even be surprised if they dropped lower than this position, to be honest. I think this is one of those teams that teams below them, like Spain, Japan, and Hong Kong, can really leapfrog over in order to get onto the next level. Number 9, Finland. Finland, I do think, has the best roster out of these three teams, given the fact that they are ahead. And I do have some biases of the teams that are ahead of them that prevent me from putting them higher. Although they probably deserve to be 7th, I think I like 8 and 7, just that little bit extra. Sauna is amazing and deserves credit for being so. Vistola and LH Cloudy make a good as ever tank line. They have Masa, a former grand finalist on the main support slot, as well as a few good contenders pickups like McG and Cloud. I do think Finland has the chance to go higher more than the rest of the teams I've said so far, and I am happy to see them have done so well in a group that is filled with very strong teams.
Number 8, Thailand.
Thailand is really underrated coming into this. I think a lot of their players deserve a lot of credit for being very, very good at the game. High Vision, for me, is an absolute standout on this team for being just absolutely crazy. His hit scan play is sublime, and every time he pulls it out, I just don't know if Thailand can lose against some of these teams in the middle of the pack. Is that Ace is also more of a hit scan player, so that does cause some overlap, but they do have, again, that ever important support line with Pali and Opudo. Opudo being a former DPS player makes things a bit confusing, but the support line has been making the work. Tidawat is a good coach that has been around in the scene for a very long time, including coaching teams like Uprising, including being a player on teams like Uprising Academy. I'm excited to see how good Thailand can really be under this leadership, and hopefully they can be better than what other people anticipate them to be. Seriously, I'm seeing some people put them all the way down in 15th. Number 7, Australia. Australia is just a very consistent team. They have 4 players coming from the same team, being Ground Zero Gaming. A very good Australian contenders team. Nothing too special, however. Usually placing around first or second, depending on if there's any other good teams in the area. Kuffa is a very good main tank player, and Punk can fill in the gaps where needed. Otherwise, we might see Punk being the very good tank player with Kuffa filling in the gaps where needed. I don't have a ton of concern about this roster. Bertlog and Aki are, again, a very solid support lineup, something we don't see too often. Kuffa and Punk round out that flexibility on tank. And my only real problem comes down to the DPS, where Nanda is a bit of a Pharah OTP with some flexibility onto Echo and Genji. Nami and Kin are both hit scans, so it can make playing without a Pharah a bit difficult, so they could absolutely falter compared to some of these higher teams and even drop out at the first rounds. The reliance on Pharmacy might make it so that then Nanda drags this team down a little bit. Good teams with good coordination should be able to shut that kind of play down pretty easily, but this team should still be able to make waves as long as they can play up to a certain level that we expect them to. It's still Australia, Overwatch League level talent on this team. They can make some moves happen. They just need a bit of a push. Number 6, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a very, very well-built team. Yezin is a bit of a Nanda situation where he's a bit of a Pharah one-trick, although Yubi and Quartz have different hero pools, so they can fill in the flexibility where needed. KSA is an exemplary tank player who can really flex around to whatever the team needs. Haku, Summerjet, and 1 make a really, really good support line that I think is very dangerous. And best of all, this team is almost entirely made up of Twisted Minds. Top contenders EU team filled with Saudi Arabian talent who can really shine on this roster. Really, the only question is if they can go even higher. I think there are certain teams above them who could honestly lose to them. This is probably the first team that I've talked about that really has an off chance, given some random circumstances, to make a play for Grand Finals. Saudi Arabia, with a bit of luck, could just make it to the end. Number 5. The United States. Let me explain.
Hey, so I just want to clear some things up about this part. It's a little bit outdated. At first, it was Hydron being the only DPS player on the United States team. Nowadays, it is confirmed that Sugar Free and Hydron will both be DPSing for the United States. And also my arguments here are also really bad, so I'm going to restate them real quick. Kaluj, Dante, and Super make up the tank line for this team, and that is 3 different players, all of whom are pretty decent, but that's a lot of power in the tank line where I think DPS and especially support kind of need it more. RuPaul and Ultraviolet are both very good players, but they're both flex supports. RuPaul just won the league on flex support. Ultraviolet just played fairly well this season on flex support. You don't have a main support player for Team United States. And while you do have a hit scan and flex DPS on this team, I don't know if they're really going to be that good of a duo when compared to the teams above them. I do think that Team United States might be slightly underrated here, especially given the fact that I was working under the precedent that Kaluj would be playing DPS or Dante would be playing DPS. Even then, that's not a terribly bad fate. But I still want to stand by this opinion because I think the teams above the US are really just that good. And I think that the shortcomings that this team has, especially in the support line, is going to make the US crump a little bit. Support is so important to me coming into this playoffs that having anything below absolute superstars on main and flex support, I think will be a hindrance. RuPaul is a superstar, but not a superstar on things like Lucio or Brigitte. He's only serviceable at best from what we've seen. If they want to succeed, RuPaul has to show off a very good main support.
I feel very little faith in the United States compared to before. And yes, that means I have them losing to number 4, the United Kingdom. Unlike Team USA, who, even if they're filled with owl talent, the United Kingdom actually has good players on certain roles. The main support gap is ginormous. Funny Astro is insane and still one of the best players in the world. Backbone, W Maimon, and Kai would make a great DPS trio if Backbone wasn't ruling the fucking world on Ana. Jkaru is a very consistent tank player. Smex is here just to vibe. And Cronus is chill. We like Cronus. This team has played super well. They have the ever consistent and ever incredible coaching of Christopher, and I don't see where UK can go wrong. The only thing I can think of is their backline being slightly abusable, but that usually happens with poor mechanics on backlines, and Backbone and Funny Astro are absolutely not a backline with poor mechanics. Probably the second best mechanics in the whole tournament. I have very high expectations from the United Kingdom, and I hope to see them have some very big plays. Number 3, China. The juggernauts of years past. A permanent finalist appearance every single year, with the exception of 2017 and 2016, which we don't talk about. They are ever consistent, ever incredible, and they have a very good lineup. It's basically just the starting roster of the Hangzhou Spark, just adding in faraway 1987 for the added consistency. Now, there are some question marks around Gushue in 20. For example, I do think Ligue should have been on this team as an instant lock, but this team is still stacked to the gills. With a fairly weak main support, I do think China could still make huge plays and even come up to a finalist appearance. Could even win if South Korea chokes. Number 2, South Korea. The actual kings of the World Cup. In actual played matches, South Korea have lost once. Not counting group stages where South Korea went 2-2 against France and the United States. They basically have one loss compared to a whole sea of wins. First place in 2016. Not even close. First place in 2017, not even close. First place in 2018, they didn't even drop a single map. It's South Korea. They have the most stacked roster that I think is possible to be built without just adding Proper to replace Sparkle, and I don't even know what else you would add in support. Violet. South Korea is a super team of super teams, and I don't see a world where they don't win this tournament. Unless Team Colombia comes in to take it all, baby. That's right, the Colombia stocks are over the roof. EQO is back and ready as ever. We've got fucking Super Gomez here to take over the world. Mix V, the main support legend. Hug is the best flex support you've ever seen. And Eternal's a god amongst men. I cannot wait for Colombia to finally reach the first place position that they rightfully deserve.
If you want to know my general rankings, you can stop right about there. But this is 3 months old, as I've mentioned a couple times already in this video. So my thoughts and the general atmosphere of the league and the World Cup have changed since then. If I would to change anything, I think it would realistically just be to maybe put USA over United Kingdom and to put China definitely above South Korea. China in the form of the Hangzhou Spark kind of gave every team that all of those players are on the business except for Fearless and looked extremely good doing it. I think China actually has a very good shot of winning the World Cup this year, and finally the Silver Prince can get the respect they deserve, and that would be beautiful if they can. Especially if you consider what my last video was that I made and what it was called. It's already aged very poorly, and I couldn't be happier. Outside of that, Colombia #1, man.